Welcome to today's IL MathCom. Thank you all for coming. And we just want to say that the reason we started this was really because we wanted to spread the joy and wonder of mathematics across Illinois. And we have been doing such a great job. I really appreciate everybody that's been coming and those of you that are coming multiple times. Today we will be talking about formative assessment. So quick introductions. I'm Heather Brown. I'm a math content specialist with Illinois State Board of Education through ISU. Janine?
I'm Janine Shepard. I'm a math and science content specialist.
And I'm going to do a shout out. Sue Mainville is also one of our assessment colleagues. So she is here as well. So we wanted to thank her for coming. This is the second or third time she's been involved. She does great work with math as well. And then our guest speaker today is Cheryl Tobey. Cheryl, do you want to wave? From the Maine Department of Education, and she is going to tell us a little bit about herself, not ourselves, maybe about ourselves too. And then she will be sharing her screen and going. So Cheryl, without any further ado, I'll let you kind of explain yourself, and then you can share your screen whenever you're ready. Thank you.
All right. Great. Hello, everyone. So it's funny when you say it's 3:30 because it's 4:30 here. I am the elementary math DOE specialist at the moment, and I'm about 3 years on this job. Prior to this, I was 16 years at nonprofits, Education Development Center and the Maine Math and Science Alliance. And before that, 10 years as a classroom teacher. And so really what I'm bringing to you today is really from all the teachers that I've worked with over the last 19 years. And I'm really excited to bring these ideas to Illinois. So I am going to share my screen because I do have a presentation for you before we break into discussions. Let me present. So as Heather said, that it is around formative assessment, but a very specific piece of formative assessment, which is using summative items as formative tasks in order to move our students' learning forward. So formative assessment is this really big term that means a lot of things. And in my nonprofit work, I was really lucky enough to have a number of National Science Foundation grants and Institute for Education Science grants where we actually got to study formative assessment and study how teachers and students get better at owning the formative assessment process. And these formative tasks are just one small piece of this work, but it's a piece that many people are finding very helpful. So first, we will start really talking about the formative assessment probe idea in general, and then we'll get into the summative released items piece. But just to give a little background on the formative assessment probes and some of that work that we've done in this area. And when I say we, at Education Development Center and at the Maine Math and Science Alliance, the two nonprofits that I've worked for, I always worked with a wonderful team of people. And so all of this work is as a result of that work. So when we think about this common misconceptions, what we're really talking about in the work that we have done on these probes is thinking about these research-based difficulties that are across multiple studies and across multiple grade levels. So we have been working in this area K-12. It's always really hard to do an hour presentation with K-12 educators when there's so much we can say about every single grade or grade spans. And often we will work with just K-2 educators or 3-5 educators for a whole course around misconceptions specific to the students at their grade level, as well as middle school or high school. So you'll get a kind of a broad picture, but a lot of resources that will be applicable to any grade span. So we're really talking about those research-based difficulties when we're talking about formative assessment probes. And there's a research base to it because it's shown no matter where you live, no matter what curricula you use, no matter what program you're trying, that these are likely misconceptions because they're likely part of learning. To teach without causing misconceptions is impossible. We all will create misconceptions in our teaching. It's about knowing those misconceptions that are most likely and knowing how to uncover them from our students so that we can confront them. So these difficulties often they're really resulting from conceptual misunderstandings. We're not talking about those computation difficulties, even though that is a part of it. Instead, we're talking about misconceptions that are overgeneralizations or common errors that really have a root conceptual basis. And I'll give you a couple of examples. So if you think about circling the fractions with the greater value, if you would type, if you are able to, type into the chat or talk if you're muted in your group of 2 or more, what do students need to know in order to circle the fraction with the greatest value? And more importantly, for this conversation, what are some of the common misconceptions that they might have? So I'll just give you a minute to do that. And I'm going to see if I can actually see the chat. And for some reason, I'm not seeing the chat. So if there are questions that pop up, Heather, Janine, that would be great if you could just kind of make me aware of them.
Sure. People are saying common denominators, misconceptions, look for common numerators, bigger numbers, bigger answers. Students will either focus on the numerator or the denominator. You need to know what the top and bottom numbers represent.
Okay, great. All right, so you were able to think about some of those common misconceptions. And in our work, we actually found in the research and in collecting student work from thousands of students that there were really 4 types of the misconceptions that we could really look for. So one of them, somebody said it, the whole number thinking. They're going to find the biggest number and they're going to say that's the biggest fraction because that's the biggest number. So that was mentioned. The other one that I don't think I heard, but it might have been said, is the opposite. When students start learning about fractions, they start overgeneralizing in the opposite direction. They will actually be thinking about where's the smallest number, because fractions are different. It's smaller is bigger with fractions, which is true for unit fractions and piece sizes, but they overgeneralize it for any case. Just find the smaller fraction. This issues with the whole is something that we found from a lot of students. So many of the students that we collected work and ideas from the teachers about the kind of teaching that they were doing, students were using fraction bars, they were using fraction circles, but they were still having issues transitioning to a representation that was on paper. And one of the biggest issues, that common misconception, was not keeping the same size whole. I think I skipped one. My screen is being very touchy, sorry. So the other one that, sorry that it's not popping up, is when the 2 fractions are 1 apart. So we have something like 2/3 and 4/5. It's very intuitive for students to think about gap reasoning and think they're both 1 apart, so they must be equivalent. So that's another common misconception we look for. And in our research, we gave this particular item set to students all the way through Algebra 1. And it was amazing to us the number of students all the way through 9th grade who intuitively felt like something like 7/8 and 8/9 were equivalent because they were 1 apart. It went far beyond what we were thinking age level in the research that we did. So that was just a fraction example. I'm giving you a quick background because we want to get into the meat of this with the how do we create these and use these, and especially use our released item resources. So here's another probe set that we used in our research. And this one is at the higher end of middle school, even though we gave it all the way through high school. And again, go ahead and type in your chat or chat amongst yourselves if you are in a group of 2 or 3. What are some of the common misconceptions or common difficulties that you might expect on this item? And Heather, if you don't mind reading them as they come in.
I will in a second. But just, do you want me to go ahead and give them the link to that folder now, or wait until later, a little later on?
Yeah, and we can wait. They don't really need it yet.
Okay, great. They're saying not distributing. Students often just look for, or I'm sorry, students forgetting to multiply by the second term. Many forget to multiply both numbers. Students do not understand that the coefficient represents how many of a quantity exists. Students won't distribute the 4 to both numbers. Basically, everyone says distributing.
Distributing, yes. All right, thank you. So again, when we, in the research, what we do is we'll collect student work from a number of students, and we do try to categorize that those misconceptions. And we also found 4 in this case as well. And so one of them, again, was that issue with the distributive property where they distribute the first term only and they leave that second term alone. So that one was mentioned. So some students will do some interesting things like combine unlike terms. We see that all the time in middle school and in high school. So that isn't a surprise to us. But this one was, quite a few of these were a surprise to us. So the multiples and factors was a surprise. So 8x plus 24, when we gave them something like 4x plus 12 and they said yes, they gave us all kinds of different reasons for that, but they were really overgeneralizing from their factors and multiples and weren't really focusing on that equivalent expression and understanding what the equivalent expression really meant. If they saw multiples or factors, they were very happy to say, yes, that is equivalent because it's a multiple, because it's a factor. And this is something that surprised us in our research. It wasn't in the research that we had looked at when we actually wrote the probe. We kind of stumbled upon it and added the item to the set to see like how strong was this misconception. And it was much, much stronger than we thought of how many students were mixing up that factor multiple with the idea of equivalent expression. So when we think about these probes, often the probe set is 4 to 6 items. And in these cases, and Heather mentioned you'll be getting that link, and in that link, these probes are there in case you are interested in them. And so these items are considered what we call formative assessment probes in our work. And they allow for a quick administration and analysis because they are a selected response as well as the explanation. And so those two things together bring us a lot of information about our students' thinking. The selected response helps us as educators really do a quick sort. Okay, so how many students have the correct answer for the right reason? How many have the correct answer for the wrong reason? And so the factor multiple piece, sometimes that's going to be correct, but then sometimes they do some really strange things with it that are just not correct at all. And so that explanation is really key. Multiple choice can be a really great thing if we also have some additional information from our students. Another piece to these probes is that they have multiple items because it often takes a few different items to really get at all the different misconceptions. So when we think about writing a probe, we think about what are the misconceptions and what numbers and selected response is really going to get us those misconceptions. And some of our students will say, oh, it's kind of like a trick question. And if they know it's a trick question, where that's great that they know that there are some common difficulties that are likely to happen and that these probes are being used as a way to see if they have those misconceptions. What instead we see is students will say things like, oh, I get it, it's a trick question, and they'll very confidently select the wrong answer. Trick question, you didn't trick me. We even have a lot of students when we get the work, they'll say things like, duh. And they will have that strong misconception. 7 is the biggest number, so 3/7 is the biggest fraction. But then they will be like, how could you even ask that question? That's such a foolish question. But that's how ingrained their misconception is. They just don't have any sense that it's a probe that's actually trying to elicit the misconception that they have. So again, these multiple items, how many items is enough? Sometimes we'll have a couple items. Often though, we have 4 to 6 items in order to really get at that root cause. So when we think about in our work with teachers, and we often, as I said, work 30 hours on a particular grade level across misconceptions. And we'll really think about this ACT framework where we'll talk about, okay, what's the assessment? What's the math? What are the understandings that could be uncovered? What are the misunderstandings? How do we know about these misunderstandings? Then we actually collect the students' work and we look at it together. So what are we seeing? What are the misconceptions that our students have? And what are we going to do about it? And that's that T, that take action. We really will focus on that take action next time in session 2. Today is really about that A and the C. What are the assessments and how do we consider student thinking? So we're focusing on just the use of these probes first, but we always want to keep that T in our mind. How are we going to take action on the results that we have? So how does this relate to the release probe idea? That's the big question. So one of the things that we found in the 16 years that we've been doing this is that state tests are full of formative assessment probes. They're full of items that have distractors that are eliciting common misconceptions. So if that's what students are going to be seeing, it's something that we want to be working on. Let's take these released items and use them in a way that is formative for both us and our students. So a couple of questions. That I heard. Okay, so if we're using our released items to really get at that root cause of the problem, what's the conceptual difficulty and how many students have these conceptual difficulties, we're going to be in a much better place to be able to take action, that T and the ACT cycle. So this is an example from our state, just to show you, and I picked, so we knew that this comparing fraction idea was a big issue. Our formative probes showed us that students have these misconceptions in 3rd grade, 4th grade, all the way up. So we started looking at our released items and saying, where are those comparing fraction items? And just like a lot of assessments, most of the assessment is multiple choice. And so when we get a comparing fraction item, we take it and we create a probe out of it simply by adding on this explain your thinking so that we can get more evidence from our students. So once we do that, our teachers then have the ability to give this probe, not to practice for the state test, even though, there's always a time and a place to practice for the state test and test tips and all of that wonderful fun stuff that we do. But instead, what we're shifting to is how do we use these released items? And the students don't even know they're practicing for the state test, but we're using them as exit tickets. Then we're using them in our class to confront misconceptions and have discussions around what math explanations are. So these are just a couple of pieces of student work we just collected recently. And lo and behold, the same misconceptions that show up in the research around comparing fractions show up by using the release item. But again, these two students are both saying A, but their reasoning is so different. And that's something that we really want to explore and that we have a great time talking about. So what do you think this student's thinking? What might we ask this student tomorrow? How are we going to instruct these students that are thinking A? And out of my class of 18, I have 5 of them. What am I going to do to differentiate where I have some students that are still looking at this in a different way? So here's another example. We knew the expressions idea, the distribution idea is an issue. So we looked through the released items and we said, you know what, we have this research-based difficulty. So what on our state test is going to assess the same idea? And let's use this released item as a probe by adding on this explain your thinking. So the same information or similar information can be gathered through our released items if we have that lens of what can we use as tasks, formative tasks with our students, and how do we create this as a formative assessment task with some explanations and work shown. And and what our teachers are saying is actually pretty simple. They're very excited about this idea because they're tired of giving the 8 items practice test and kind of going over it. They want a new approach. And I'll be able to share in our next session some of the really cool routines they're building around using these in their classroom, it's really exciting. So I did the same thing. We collect work. Teachers all choose different released items, collect work on, bring it back to our PLCs or whatever virtual network we might be a part of, but we talk about the actual student work from the week and figure out, okay, if our students were to see this assessment item tomorrow on our state assessment, how well are they going to do? Well, what are we going to do about it so that if they do see an item like this that have this concept and these misconceptions distractors in a different way, that they're not going to be tricked. So I did the same thing last week for your released items. So I looked at the PARCC released items and I just picked a couple and asked one of my teacher groups, hey, would somebody want to give this? This is not our state assessment items, but guess what? It's other state assessment items that get at the same misconceptions. So they were happy to give it. And so for grade 4, I actually found 2 comparing fraction items that would get out some of those misconceptions. And you can see on the right where, and again, this probe is in that link as well that Heather's going to share shortly. So all of this information is in that folder. So I took these 2 multiple choice items and I simply just took a snapshot of them and put them into the probe template format where we have the explain or show your thinking. So it did the same thing. I said, well, what kind of equivalent expressions, distributive property ideas might show up? And I found lots of them. I just picked one, and this was a grade 6 item. I have to say, though, that we had to give it to 7th graders in Maine because all of the 6th graders in the network, 6th grade teachers in the network said, oh, wow, there's no way right now in January that my students would be able to be successful at all on this. And so so this one looks a little different because there were so many. It was a select each, and that's a perfect probe situation because when it says select each, what we do in that case is we change them to these yes or no, a series of yes or no questions so is this equivalent? Yes or no, and why? And they can show or explain. They don't have to use words. And so this is a perfect item to change into a formative task to gather that thinking. So what we would like to do now is to split you to share that folder with you and to split you into those breakout rooms where you can actually discuss this a little bit more. Some thoughts on the process, what you've heard so far, and also to look at the student work that was collected on these PARCC released items turned into probes. So in the folder, there will be a student work for the fraction and a student work for the equivalent expressions. And you'll have a little bit of time to consider the students' thinking. That C in the X cycle. We'll spend about 10 minutes. You might not get through all the student work papers, but what you'll do is just scan a couple that can be pulled up and discussed, or could be referenced to discuss. Okay. So Heather, I will let in, before we do that though, I would love to open it up. If there are just any questions that you have, you can put it into the chat as well. But before we break out, are there some questions or thoughts that you would like to share?
And we will also all come back together. So
yes,
there is that. So if you are typing, I'm going to go ahead and explain what the process is. Janine has put us into breakout rooms. So half of the people will be moving. Janine, is it the K-5 people?
Yes, the K-5.
Okay. So if you, when you signed up, gave us an indication that maybe K-5 was the room for you, then you will get a pop-up that says, would you like to join would you like to join this breakout room? And you just click yes and move. If you are 612, you're actually just going to stay in this room. Is that right, what you did?
Yes.
You're going to stay in this room and continue the discussion here. But we will have Cheryl stop sharing her screen for a moment.
Sure.
And in the process, if we need to, Janine and I both have access to these and can share them. We can share our screens in our smaller group, or we can leave it as everyone looking at their own screen so that we can kind of see each other and have a discussion. So we have, I have posted the link to everyone. And the only comment, Cheryl, somebody posted, I'm excited about this idea. The most missed questions on our exams are the select all that apply. So this is a good use of those.
Okay, great.
All right. So I think we're going to go ahead and split. So if you are in the K-5 room, you should be getting a pop-up. If you can just click OK.
Hello. So hopefully I selected you right. My phone in caller, it's a 618 number. So I knew based on that you were probably either Lysandra or Kim. Can you let me know who you are? Phone in caller.
That might be my number calling in.
Oh, okay.
Because I dialed in to the phone versus there, and I'm actually from Washington State, so I'm just kind of crashing your webinar because I know Cheryl. So.
All right. No, that's absolutely fine too. Well, no, I can see your name. So I have down.
Well, because I called in a phone. It might not be me, but I called in my phone, so it shows two different. It could show two different numbers. There are two different references to me.
Okay. I just got to note that Hillary wants to join us, so I need to move her really quickly. Hillary. Here we go. Okay, so she'll switch over. All right. So have you had a chance to open? Hi, Hillary.
Hi.
Have you had a chance to open the Bitly folder, the Bitly link?
I couldn't figure out how to do it, in all honesty.
Right, in the chat, can we still see the whole chat? Yes, we can, or I can. Can you guys still see the chat? So if you click the Bitly link that says IL MathCom, it'll take you to Cheryl's folder, and then we can look at those prompts, those probes, and then we can talk about our hope. Heather and I were hoping that over the next few weeks before the second part of our call, that you would have a chance to try one of these with your classes and get student work that we could then look at next time on our next call. So have you had a chance to open any of those? Julie, if you're talking to me, you're muted. I just unmuted you. Go ahead.
Okay. I can't find where to open it. I have my chat open, but I don't show those links anymore.
Okay, let me send it again. I'll send it straight to you.
Okay.
There you go. Do you have any questions or comments about the process as you've learned it so far?
No, I'm just moving right along with you guys right now. Let me tell you. Okay, I see the link, but I'm clicking on it and it's not opening.
Interesting. Try copying and pasting it into your browser. Heather and I are really excited about this work though. So we're always talking about our encouraging teachers to use these PARCC released items and just sprinkling them throughout the curriculum. You don't want to give them the whole practice test because who wants to take the PARCC twice, right? Like that's just the worst. That's torture for kids. So, but if we can sprinkle them into our curriculum, then we're getting them used to the language and the format of these questions so that it's not foreign when they encounter it in March. But this takes it a whole step further of really using it as a tool to dig really deep into how our students are understanding, where those misconceptions lie, and then using that to drive our instruction.
Yeah, I actually really like this idea. I work with a lot of teachers who embed them in their summative assessment, but not so much in their formative. So I might steal some of these ideas and bring it back to them, because when I'm reviewing the examples, it almost doesn't even look like a PARCC released item. I mean, it looks like something you would just do with the students within that unit, wherever you're at. So I do really like that, because that way we can use it to inform instruction rather than it just being on the summative.
Right.
I still couldn't open the link, but I have seen the released PARCC fourth grade items. And I've been weaving them into my number talk sessions.
Ooh, excellent.
Because we noticed in our school district, it's not secret, it's public knowledge, our math scores were going down. And so not a lot of teachers like to prepare for PARCC in our district, but it's a necessary evil. So just by weaving them into number talks, it didn't feel less threatening. But
it's a great low stakes activity to do with your kids where they all feel safe to share.
Yeah. But to have that written data of their explanation, I think is also very important, and I think both should be done. I mean, like for me, I want to do both. So
well, and I think it's one of those things where some items might be more appropriate for the number talk, and then other items would be more appropriate for this. So you can kind of sort them that way.
For sure.
Is everybody else on the call familiar with number talks?
Yes.
Very good. We have resources. If you're not, there's resources on our on our mathteachersinaction.org page under professional learning. All right. Any other ideas or observations? Concerns?
This is Anne. Can you hear me?
Yes.
So I was really intrigued by, some of these, like one of the probes, the student thinking, has 2/4 is equal to 8 and 6/8 is equal to 8. And, I'm curious about what do I think that student was thinking. I'm not sure, and would love to see if other folks have ideas in terms of a comparison. So they were comparing, are the two equal? Is 2/4 equal to 6/8?
Is that's under the grade 4 student work?
Yes, I'm sorry. It's under grade 4, and I don't think these are numbered, but it's about, I think, 2/3 of the way down.
Oh, I found it. Here, I'll share my screen real quick.
Okay.
right.
Yeah, that's
you guys
it.
see that? That's interesting. Yeah. What do you think they're thinking? Well, and that's completely different than the work that they show here. Huh.
Right.
That worries me that this is the completely clueless student.
And so my wondering is, also how do you also kind of choose some of these that maybe it's just too difficult to get any understanding of what they're thinking is, even if they explained it, because their explanation is so limited.
Mm-hmm.
But then, how do you find those ones that, like the one above, 5 plus 4 is equal to 9? So are they? Yeah, it looks like if I add the numerator and denominator, it's equal to the numerator, which isn't interesting.
Wow. Yeah. And
Scary. It makes me think that, I know we're not talking about the T, but I just finished reading In the Moment, I had to check the title, about conferring in the math classroom. And it makes me think like this will be a great place to start a conference.
Yes. Yes.
Because like, I'm wondering, like, number one, did the child absolutely have no idea, but was looking for some way to link both the fractions, and 5 plus 4 equals 9 was the only way? No, because 3 plus 4 equals 7. No, yeah. I was trying to come up with a rationalization for this answer. I can't do it. But so I think this would be a great time to sit down with a student and so you can probe deeper.
Definitely.
I like that idea, because as I think about, helping supporting teachers around intervention, when you can see those, and as Cheryl talks about sorting them, those that, okay, clearly they have it, others who, because of their explanation, you cannot quite understand what their misconception is, so you actually can kind of target it, but then there's some that could be completely clueless, or maybe just because they didn't do a good job of explanation, need a little more intensive one-on-one opportunities to explain their thinking or get reteaching.
Yeah, I love using this as a tool to find the kids that need that just-in-time intervention, like before they end up too far behind. We can hopefully boost them up with a well-timed intervention. All right. Any other student work you guys want to look at?
This is Leanne. If you were using this, say, with a group of teachers, because I work with, like 7 or 8 teachers at a time. I was thinking of having different teachers using different probes, just so that as educators, we can have the conversation as to why the students are thinking the way they are, or should I have them all use the same probe set?
I think you could develop an argument around either. I think it would be interesting to see how the different groups of students responded to the same task, taking in mind different teachers' strategies and personalities, right? Like, because we're all going to inadvertently push our kids towards different misconceptions.
Well, in this group that I'm speaking of, I have found that they have very different ways of using the same text series, but explaining the work differently. And some of them I've had to speak to because they're doing it incorrectly. But the only problem with having them all do the same ones, not all the teachers are in the same chapter. They're not all in the same unit. They should be not quite lockstep, but we have a couple that are way behind the others.
But if it's something that all of them know how to do, you could have some really good professional conversations about, when I was a coordinator, we'd have teachers talk about the fact, how come my kids all missed this one and had this misconception and yours didn't? And then you can have some good conversations about how they taught the concept in kind of a non-threatening manner.
Okay. So maybe back it up to something that I know all the teachers have already covered.
Yeah.
And give them the probes and have them utilize those probes.
Yeah.
Just so we can start the conversation.
Yeah, and it's always good to keep reviewing and refreshing.
Okay, thank you.
I've been informed that they're ready for us to come back to the main group, so I'm going to click close all rooms, and then if you could just select to return to main session.
One with this link. The other piece is that on the template, so in your resource, the document that you have there, another thing that we provide teachers are these templates, these Google Doc templates for different versions of probes. So here's one that's just a single item. So here, put your prompt in, put your multiple choice in.
Can I pause you just for 1 second?
Sure can. Yes.
Because I think most of the other group has just come back.
Okay, perfect.
All of this is actually stuff that I think they would enjoy to learn about as well.
Right.
So can I ask you just to rewind maybe the last 30 seconds and kind of go through. I'm going to share this bit.ly link that goes to this Google Drive one more time with everybody so that you can kind of see it. And then, if you can just kind of retouch on just a couple of those things that we were just doing.
Sure. So so are we all back now? We're good?
Jenny, she gave me a thumbs up. She believes everyone's back.
One of the questions that always comes up is, can we edit these probes? So in this link, the bit.ly link is just a Google folder that has PDFs of the items and some other pieces like the student work. But there's also a link to various resources. And I was showing, so right now you can't edit the items that I created, but I can easily send a Google Doc link. But I thought it was important to show how we're doing this in Maine as a way for you to think about how to do this with a group. So you're not all recreating the wheel and creating these without a way to share them. And so in this resource link that you have access to, I did put our Maine database sample in. And this Maine sample database is where we house all of our multiple choice items from our state tests that have been turned into probes. And it's a simple spreadsheet, but it does have some other resources like a planning template, and it also has a how to create a probe template. But what we do is, for example, bar graph, 3rd grade. You can open up that probe, and it is something you can copy to your own drive and edit to your heart's desire. Some people want to edit the explain your thinking. Some people want to combine a couple of items together. We typically put the Common Core standards, our state standards in the footer for teacher purposes. Most teachers take that out before they print or give the probe. But it's this database idea that teachers across Maine are very happy and excited about, because they don't have to create it themselves. As people or as groups are creating these, they send me the link and I add them. I had a whole group of math coaches in a project last year that sat down one day and created most of them together, and that's where this database started. And then we slowly add them. For you high school folks, our high school test is the SAT, and so they're in the 612 probe. There are about 15 different released items, 2018 released items from our state SAT test that have, again, been turned into these formative assessment probes with that show your thinking prompt. And so we'll be adding to those SAT items throughout the year as we work with different groups. So really thinking about how you might create something similar that's a resource that anyone can access and add to, so that you're working together to create something similar in your state. Let me go back to this. Is it okay if I don't share this, because then I don't lose all the other things?
Yeah.
Okay. So just K-5, I would love to hear if there are a couple of people, or maybe Janine might be able to just summarize what were some of the conversations that you had, or any questions that came up for you when you were in your breakout session.
Well, we had, I think it was Hillary that was talking about using PARCC released items as number talks. So she had already been collecting formative assessment data by using some of these items as number talks. And she talked about how some might be even better, more appropriate for that probe. Real quick, here we go. So she's gonna try using both ways, some that are more conducive to the number talk, and then some others that are more conducive to the probe. Then there was another question and discussion around when you have 7 teachers in a PLC whose students might be at different spots in the curriculum because of the pace that they're keeping. Would it be appropriate to give different probes to different teachers?
Nice question, and that happens all the time. Mm-hmm. So our 3rd grade teachers are really struggling, that they're struggling learners. The 3rd grade items are just too difficult, and so we have this hard issue. Do we give them grade level items because that's what they're going to see? Our state test is not adaptive. Or if we really want this to be formative and embedded in our instruction, how do we create these or find these for grade 2 items or 2 concepts, or how do we go backwards? So it's easy if you're a 4th grade teacher, you can go back to the 3rd grade items. 5th grade can go back. Our special educators often have to go back 2 years. So we are in the process of developing a bank in the same MEA database of grade 2 items from various universal screeners that our teachers are using. So for example, a 2nd grade teacher sent me a bunch of NWEA release items yesterday, or a practice test item. And just so we could get a sense of how could we create some probes at a 2nd grade level for those 3rd grade teachers that are really struggling to find items that are a good fit for all their students. So there will be lots of differentiation, and you could still stay with the same concept. So fractions grow over the years, but maybe you have 3 different groups taking 3 different fraction probes, knowing where they are in your trajectory. And I love the idea of the number talks. Several of our teachers are playing around with creating some sets of released item data as numberless questions, or the questionless problems, and using that as a routine in that way as well. And I think you're absolutely right. Some of them, sometimes you want it to be the discussion and a routine, and then other times you do want to have them do some writing and some representation on their own, so you can see what are they getting from those talks, what are they getting from those routines, and how is it translating to their individual ability to actually do something with these items in this way. So I did want to share a little bit about some of the other links, and please, I lost that chat again with this showing. So if anything pops up, please just holler out if I'm missing something. So I did give you some other resources. They're just, I think the PARCC released items is definitely the way that we're talking about, and something that we'd like you to try before the next session. But because these resources have a lot of background to them, there are some other resources that I gave you as links. And in that Google Doc, in the Google folder, the only Google Doc has a bunch of these links. One of them is some templates for creating probes. So for example, those multiple item probes, if you copy this to your own drive, and it's just a template that provides you a way to create the probes. We wanted the probes to all look similar in Maine. That may or may not be the case for you, but we provided these templates to teachers who were creating these just so we could have a similar look. The eliciting math misconceptions is we had 5 years of a grant through Institution of Educational Sciences to really look at rational number misconceptions. And those probes with a ton of student work samples are here under this link, eliciting mathematics misconceptions. And what's nice about those probes is that they're pre and post. So the same concept has a pre-after instruction you can give a post. And some teachers are really loving the student work because they can do error analysis routines with their students as well. So we'll talk a little bit more about that next time. Oklahoma State had a project where they had us create probes. So again, these are all open sources. It's Oklahoma State standards, but I hate to say that doesn't matter if you change your state standards. The same misconceptions come up when you're doing mathematics. So what's nice about this Oklahoma State project is that all the probes have teacher notes, and there are some little short video clips for teachers, what's a probe, how do you use probes, and so you can learn more about probes in that way as well. And then there are some K2 samples of probes for those of you that work with younger students. Often in K and 1, we could spend a lot of time on that. They're often interviews where it's a verbal exchange rather than asking students to write. And so these resources are available to you in this Google Doc, along with the 2 probes we started with, the fraction and the expression, the PARCC release versions of those, and the student work. Quite a few of our teacher leaders will actually gather student work sets to bring back to their colleagues to introduce this idea. It's easier sometimes to share student work from somebody else to just set up the process and say, hey, do we want to try one of these together? And so feel free to use that student work in that way as well. So we've kind of mentioned this and kind of have put this out there that we'll be talking about the take action next time. But I just want to remind you that really everything we've done today is diagnostic assessment and not formative assessment, because formative assessment requires action and it requires student ownership and a student piece of that action. And that is really important to move from the diagnostic to the formative. And so for that take action piece, that will be that January 31st session where we look at some routines and some ways to think about responsive action. What are the different responsive actions when we're looking at student work in this way? And what are some routines so that we can close the feedback loop with our students and really get even more for bang for a buck with doing these? Because if the students are involved in that feedback loop, then you're much more likely to move their learning forward. So that is to come. I don't know, Heather, Janine, I didn't put anything formal down of what we would, if you're joining us again for session 2, it would be really helpful to have tried a probe, whether it's one of the ones that was already developed for this session, or developing one of your own at your particular grade level using a released item. And I don't know if either one of you want to say more about that.
No, that's exactly it. That's what we're hoping to discuss is a little more clearly. If it's something that you feel, we're going to put in Cheryl's Google Drive. We are going to add a task from each grade from the PARCC assessment. so that you can use those. But you can also, as Cheryl described, you can either use one of the ones we're using as an example, or you can certainly take a PARCC assessment or somewhere else that you have a standard aligned question and turn it into a probe that you see a multiple choice or a multiple select item. And then while you're doing that, bring that information back. If it's something that you created and you're willing to share with the others, thousands of teachers in Illinois, feel free to share it or send it to Janine and I, and we can certainly include that in our future files. As well as if you have interesting student work that you want to share with us, we would love for you to bring it to have a discussion about. If you can take the names off and are willing to share it with the other educators of Illinois, please feel free to send that to Janine or I. We can certainly take care of it from there. But we would love for you to try this before we come back on the 31st. Any other questions?
Yeah, we have a couple more minutes, so I'd love, it's always funny when you put the presenter screen up, you can no longer see anything, so I feel like I've been just talking away. So I would love to hear in the chat any comments or any thoughts, reflection, anyone who wants to ask a question or say something, unmuting themselves.
And I also just shared in a couple links. We will put some of the links that were shared here. We'll put those in the forum, so you have a link. The forum is just where all of our IL Math comms are listed. If you didn't learn about this from the listserv, please join the listserv so that you'll hear about both the one January 31st and any future ones. And then tweet about it. But any questions, people are completely welcome to unmute and ask questions, or you can type something in the chat window.
I just posted the link to our post survey too. So if everybody could take a minute it's just a few reflection questions, but it really helps us measure our impact and provide data back for our supervisors.
Which allows us to keep offering IL Math Com. So no pressure there, but if you want us to come back January 31st, we need to make sure we have all the. All right, then I'm hoping everybody is bringing questions next time. I appreciate all the comments that were made in the chat, and we're hoping to see you all again January 31st. And feel free, this recording will probably be up by Friday, tomorrow, is that right? The recording will be up, so feel free to send other people to it. You can come to just the second one, so if somebody you know wants to come to the second one, but they could also, if they would like to, they could watch this first one before they come to the second one. Either of those options are okay. So I just want to thank Cheryl so much for joining us and giving us this wealth of information, and especially thank you for being willing to come back for our follow-up. Thanks so much. You guys can go ahead.
Bye.
Thanks, Jenny.